Hi Year 9s, this is your final lesson, lesson 5, and we're going to go through quite a few things today again. Finishes, timber conversion and your polymer keywords, alright, so a bit of what we've done in the past as well. So starting with finishes, there's two reasons for them. Aesthetically, which makes your work look nice, alright, whatever material you've used, if you paint it with paint, it's going to look different. With timber, it's going to make it a different colour. For instance, if you're using MDF for a start, it's not particularly pretty wood, so you might want to paint it. Alright. Also, there's a function to painting or to finishing. It stops moisture or other substance getting into the timber and ruining it. So it's a form of protection. So the two main reasons for finishing, for using certain finishes, are aesthetics and for function. Alright, so one, to make it look pretty, and two, to protect it from anything that might fall on it, like water or, you know, any kind of other oil substance, whatever. So the first one that we'll look at is painting. Alright, now painting is obviously what I said earlier. You know, some timbers won't look particularly pretty, so you might want to make sure that you've got a nice colour to it. So you might want to change the colour. MDF, for instance, like I said, it's not the most prettiest timber in the world, so you may want to cover it with paint to get rid of the rather boring, it almost just looks like cardboard. Alright, so painting it will change the colour. Alright, now you've got obviously different finishes within paint. Similar to your house, you've got matte, satin and gloss. If you want it shiny, you'd use a gloss. If you want it to have sort of a soft sheen to it, as it were, you'd use a satin. You can also use different textured paints as well, so you get a different sort of finish. So furniture wise, it's great for children's toys to, you know, to make them more appealing to young children. You might want to colour them bright colours. You don't get wood which is bright yellow, for instance, or, you know, blue and pink, so you might want to add colour to it using paint. Now the advantages of using paint, as we said, are obviously it changes the colour and the texture. It's good at protecting it from, you know, water spillages or outside, if you've left anything outside, or if you've got you know, a shed that you wanted to paint a different colour, you'd use a weatherproof coloured paint. Stops the rain getting in. Disadvantages is that you do need to prepare your timber first, alright? So you will have to give it a good sanding. It's probably then going to need another coat, another sand in between, so that you get a nice smooth finish. You know, sometimes when you paint something, I've said to you in the past, you get the little ridges because you might put too much paint on it, and those ridges will show up, and once that's dry, you'd sand that down so that it was an even surface again, and then you'd add another coat of it. Alright, and you do need a little bit of skill for that. So there are advantages and disadvantages to painting. So the next finish is varnishing. Right, now varnishing is slightly different from paint because generally it's a clear varnish. Okay, you can get them with colours, so you like oak or beech or something like that, but generally you would use this to enhance the wood that you're using. Alright, so it forms a layer on top of the wood, so it stops anything getting in. So its main function really is to make it, to protect it. Alright, now again, aesthetically, like I said, it changes the texture of your timber. If you look at this diagram here, the photograph, you can see where the varnish has gone on it, where it isn't on it. It gives you an absolute, shows you absolutely how it changes. This bit here, it's bringing out the texture and the patination in the timber, so it looks pretty. All right, this is a little bit boring on the bottom half, but where the varnish has hit it, it starts to make the grain and the knots pop, and you can see them really nicely. All right, changes the tone of the wood slightly. Again, this would be used on things like wood flooring, bolts. Obviously have to be watertight, so it's important as a function to keep it protected. And furniture as well. You don't want to, you know, if you're spilling your cup of tea on your table, your coffee table, you need to know that it's protected from it. Disadvantages, again, needs careful preparation. Same as paint. You put a layer on, you get a very fine glass paper once it's dried, give it a sand down, and then you'd keep doing it until you get it to the glossiness or the finish that you want. So it is quite time consuming because it does have to be properly dry in between coats. So just a quick step-by-step for painting and varnishing, so we really understand it. Sand your surface first so it's nice and smooth. You've got to clean the dust off because it'll sit on there, and as soon as you put any varnish or paint on it, you'll start to get the little dust particles within it, and it'll ruin the finish. If you don't sand it there, if you don't dust it off and you put varnish on, you may not see the particles, but if you run your hand over when it's dried, it'll feel rough. So you need to get rid of them before you do it, okay? Now some woods will need sealing, things like MDF. You might need to put a coat of PVA on it so that it seals the wood first, because it's very porous. So you want the varnish and the paint to sit on it, okay? So you may need to seal it. Normally with a natural timber you wouldn't have to do that, but perhaps with any kind of manufactured board you may need to seal it first. Apply your thin layer of varnish or paint. Remember, don't slather it on, nice and thin. When it's dry, a very light sand. You don't want a super rough glass paper. It wants to be quite smooth. And then you have to apply again, and you repeat this process until you get the finish you want. So like I said, it's a time consuming process in order to get the finish how you want it. Now the final one on finishing is tannalizing. Now tannalizing is different from the other two because the other two sit on top of the timber. This goes in, it's forced into the timber itself, okay? So you get a much more protective, thicker layer of protection. So if you cut the top off, if you sanded the top off the timber, you would still have that preservative would still be there, okay? If you varnish something and then you chopped off where you varnished, it'd be gone. So the protection would be gone, alright? So it has a deeper protection, tannalizing. Aesthetically wise, it comes out like a golden honey colour, but eventually over time it will go greyer, and some people tend not to like that because it looks like it's worn away, the colour's worn away, or the protection worn away, but it hasn't. It's just changed colour over time. But the advantages of tannalizing is it lasts a long time, alright? 10 years or more. It's already done before you get it. So if you buy a pre-made gate, for instance, like the one down there, you don't have to treat it, you don't have to put any kind of wood stain or wood protection on it. It's already done, but you don't get as many colour finishes. Okay, so again, disadvantage is that your colour is limited. Alright, the grey colour some people find unattractive, but it doesn't need to be done again for about 10 years. So there are some advantages to it. Now here's a diagram of how it works, alright? So you've got your tannalizing chamber here. The timber is in there, and what you're going to then do is you're going to have all of the air sucked out, okay? So once that's done, you end up putting in the tannalizing liquid, which is called Tannalith, number 2, and that will then surround the timber. Alright, now what happens then is you have hydraulic pressure applied which forces that preservative into the timber. So you can see here where it's not just on the edges, it's going in. It's not going right through, but it's going a lot deeper than it would do normally. And if you were working with this and you cut that bit off there, you'd still have the protection further down. Alright, so it's important when you think about tannalizing, it's going much deeper than it would do if it was just painted on the top. All the tannalith is then removed, okay, and then again you have the surface it's all dried out and vented, and it gives you this protected piece of timber at the end. All right, and that is how you would tannalize timber. It's a manufacturing process. It would already be done for you. You wouldn't do this at home or anything. This is something that is a production method, and you would buy the timber already tannalized. And the second part of this is about felling your trees, getting them from a tree trunk, as it were, from a tree to a tree trunk, sorry. And I'm not going to talk too much about this because it's pretty self-explanatory, okay? You cut your tree down. That is normally done in winter, so the moisture level is a bit lower. The point of getting from a tree trunk to a workable piece of timber is it needs to have the moisture taken out. So you'll have a stage where it's stored and cleared, so you get rid of all of your branches and leaves, and it'll sit there for a while until it needs to go to the sawmill, and that will, over that time, it will start to remove its moisture naturally. Okay, eventually it will get transported to the sawmill, and again that can happen on a lorry, or it can be taken downstream, especially if there's a river close to it. It's a very effective way and efficient way of transporting large amounts of logs to the sawmill. Once it's there, we're going to look at the process of conversion. Okay, so conversion is basically taking the log and turning it into a workable piece of timber. So you can see here where you have it's cut in the sawmill, and then it is trimmed down into a plank. Right, now that goes through different stages. We've done this already. I'm not going to talk through it too much because you did this on previous lessons, but you can see the different versions of conversion. Again, you've got through and through, which literally is cut all the way through, and it's all used. This one here, quarter sawn, you've got these bits here are used. These may be used for something, but they're not particularly large, so there's a lot of wastage from this. All right, but you can see there are there's 2 or 3 or 4 different ways of conversion. You just need to look at the 2 on this one. Okay, so seasoning, we haven't talked about that much. Seasoning is when once it's made into a plank, it is then dried out. It can sit in a seasoning shed where the air is allowed to flow through it, and that will reduce and reduce and reduce the moisture down to the point where when it's used, it will be less likely to warp, less likely to change shape once it's made into something. Okay, so seasoning is again reducing the moisture content of the timber. Okay, finally we've got keywords and terms for polymers. Adhesive or glue, you need to know that that's a substance applied to one or both surfaces to help bind them together. And there are some examples on this slide for you to use when you're doing your final task. Okay, I'm not going to go through it with you. We've done this already. I want you to read through that. The next 3 slides are showing terms that you need to know and what they're used for. So hard or hardness is the ability to withstand scratching, cutting or abrasions, so wearing away or being scraped away. All right, and the 2 pictures there show you what they can be used for. Strong or strength, ability to withstand constant force without breaking. So again, something, if it's sat on something heavy on it, it's not going to warp, it's not going to break or fall apart. Tough and toughness, the ability to withstand a dynamic force. That's the ability to absorb energy without fracturing, okay? So that it doesn't crack or fall apart if it's thrown around. Finally, there are 3 tasks to do. I want you to do activity 1, fill in the gaps, and then the key facts of the journey of your tree down to being a plank of wood, and finally the key facts of your polymers. All right, I would like all of that finished for next week, please. Thank you very much.